Well, this is our last event, and so it says general informal wrap-up discussion. So we have to say a few comments. And I'd like to begin by, well, once again saying thank you for everybody who showed up, participated. This has been immensely informative. In fact, that kind of leads to my very first, is it on? Yeah, okay. That leads to my very first comment, actually, because there were a lot of people who participated that I did not know of ahead of time. And it's important to share experiences and to share information. And I've learned a lot. Even I was just thinking in the last session, Claudia was speaking. I didn't know that there was a Pioneer Valley Workers Center before we put this together. Right? So that's like right here, close to Amherst. No idea. So it's important, like I said, to get together and to share information. And then there was another thing I thought about as an academic. And, during this conversation, during this conference, we have people from academia, from human rights organizations, from organizing, from public policy, government officials, a lot of different people. And some of the things that I've learned here today, not just today, but yesterday, part of this conference, it's helped me to rethink. Next time I teach a labor econ course, I'm going to do some things very different. All right, there's a difference between what we teach and actually how labor markets operate. All right, there's a very old idea in economics, goes all the way back to Adam Smith, that workers of identical skill and ability will get identical compensation. And so, so one worker might get a higher wage than another one, but the worker with the higher wage will have lower benefits and maybe working conditions as not as good. And then the worker with the lower wage will have better benefits and better working conditions. It's like, that ain't true. The people with the low wages have the bad working conditions and the low benefits, right? Quite oftentimes. And so we need to just change the way we talk about that. And even gave the work for the Coalition of Remarkably Workers and the Fair Food Program on raising wages and improving working conditions. So that's just a higher minimum wage without reducing unemployment. And that's another example that we can bring into the classroom. And a number of people mentioned worker separations, getting fired, which I thought was kind of interesting. During all my years of picking oranges, I got fired once. And the reason for that was because most of the time we were working in a low unemployment environment. And actually, the guy that fired me was a contractor, and he was the father of a friend of mine, and so the contractor fired his son and me. Tells you a lot about contractors, right? He fired us because we didn't want to keep working after lunch. I mean, we got there early. We made all the money we needed for the weekend. We were young men. We had things to do. But, getting fired, worker separations, it's very difficult to fire people when they don't have an alternative workforce. And at the time that I was involved out there in the fields picking oranges, all the workers were African Americans. Of course, it was a very low-paid job, and there were no alternative workers, and that's probably why we didn't get fired. And another thing that's quite important that I think that's been emphasized, and maybe should be emphasized more, is in our discussion of international trade. Like, all of the things that we talked about here, all the different products, whether it's tomatoes or milk or some of the other flowers, these things are all a part of international trade. They exist in international markets. And most of the time when we talk about international trade, we talk about the products at the end when they're already in the store or wherever they are. And there's a direct relationship that's been brought out here between international trade and low-wage work. And that relationship has to be discussed more, and those connections brought out as a way of increasing the pay and working conditions of workers. And also related to that is when it comes to agricultural work in particular, it's hard to discuss agricultural work and not discuss migration and immigration, right? In South Central Florida, everybody came from someplace else, right? Many people came from North Florida, other people came from Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and they migrated south. And then later on, people came from Mexico. Then later on, people came from Central America. We always had a large number of Caribbean workers. But this work is also related to the issues of immigration. And that's another point that often gets, I don't think, talked about enough. And even the role of government in this process, right? And inspections and making sure that companies do what they're supposed to do. You know, so if you've ever had a course in economics, and who hasn't? It's probably your favorite course. Somewhere in there they talk about government interference, right? Of when government should be involved in the market. And in truth, the way these markets work is the government isn't interfering. You can't have the market without government, right? The two kind of work together. So that's another point that maybe we need to teach differently and to think about more. And there's a relationship. Another thing is, and this is between some of the work you're doing with worker-driven social responsibility and Kyle's presentation on inequality. The workforces of people involved in low-wage work are disproportionately African American, Latinx, other racial ethnic minorities. And so there's a direct relationship between low-wage work and racial inequality and segregation. And that point should be driven home more. I mean, in my days of orange picking, like I said, all of the orange pickers were African Americans, the contractors were African Americans, and then the white jobs started over the contractors, where there was a field foreman who rode around from grove to grove to make sure the contractor was doing what the owner wanted them to do. And of course, all the owners were white. And so there was segregation in who did what, and the wages for the people doing the work were extremely low, so that there's a connection there between the racial inequality and of course, the low-wage work. And most of the time when informal labor markets are discussed, people think about countries, you know, that have low wages in general, countries that are still developing. There's an awful lot of informal work activity in the U.S., and a lot of it is related to low-wage work, and especially agricultural labor. There are a lot of people who move in and out of agricultural labor, construction, doing other things, right? And it's very difficult to find statistics on informality in the U.S., but there's a huge amount of informal work that's very much related to low-wage work. And so, you know, that's an area where we need to do a better job. And then finally, I don't know, well, the presentation on dairy farming and the cows, like I said, like, who knew that dairy farming was so dangerous? I hadn't thought about somebody falling into a pit, but okay. if you got a lot of cows, that's a real possibility because, you know, stuff. But there's a bigger issue there of low-wage work and health inequality. A lot of these jobs do not provide health insurance. The jobs themselves are sometimes inherently dangerous, and that connection between low-wage work and health inequality is another thing that I think we could explore more in academia. So I just jotted down some notes. I got some others, but I was only supposed to talk 5 minutes, so I will, stop.
All right. First of all, like Patrick, I really want to thank everybody here. You all just did a fabulous job. I think I've organized some conferences over the course of my years. I don't think I've ever organized a conference in which I'd never met 90% of the people who I was inviting. So you all were a big surprise. You all just did a wonderful job, and I'm speaking about everyone. So thank you all again very much. Our two Dans, hey. Well, of course, we've got to see the results when we're going to have the video, and that I'm going to come back to that point in a minute. Dan Matson and Dan Winkler are experts back there. Thank you very much. And, of course, once again, Kim Weinstein, Nicole Dunham. Where's Nicole? Yeah. So you guys, fabulous work. Thank you very, very much. So I would just say, this has been a great conference, and I wish I could claim that it was my idea, and I can't. I could, but it's not true. So this is the man that came up with the idea, and I reflected on this a little bit last night. I said, so if you say to somebody who just comes into, he's a senior professor in PERI and UMass Econ, and so what's the thing you want to do now that you're here? And I thought about, well, how many economics professors would say, what I really want to do is, have an event about building worker power and well-being for low-wage workers. You're probably the only person in the entire economics profession globally that would have come up with that idea. So we've got to give Patrick a lot of credit, too. And the fact is, his idea obviously meshed perfectly with what we have been doing at PERI for a long time around things like living wage and sweatshop labor. Worker well-being. And Jeanette over there has done a lot of that work and continues to. So, but the real point in terms of the conference is, is this just a conference, or is there something from which we can build? Is there some sense to which we've created, relationships, community, meaningful structures that we can go forward? I know Patrick and I, when we initially started thinking about it, talked about, okay, what are things that we can carry out of this? Well, we are going to have the video. Well, that's one thing. That's easy. But we, as academics, of course, the first thing, and I think, again, this is Patrick's idea, do we want to have a volume, a book? And maybe we do. But maybe that's not the thing. Maybe that's the thing that professors think about, but maybe that's not the most effective thing that we can do coming out of it. So really, in my interest in continuing the discussion would be to hear what you all think we at PERI can do, or collectively we can do, that would strengthen the work that you're doing. And I'll close on that point, strengthening the work that you're doing, because speaking for myself, I just have enormous amount of respect for everything all of you are doing. It is just critically important. It is important politically. It is important ethically. trying to really work, putting your lives engaged in building more social justice for low-wage workers. So what are the ways through which we can advance this cause? That's where I would stop. So we'll just pass the mic around, and who wants to say anything?
Yeah, I have a mic, so anybody just wave at me and I'll pass it on. I can kick it off. Well, one question that I had been wanting to ask over the last couple of days is, as Bob mentioned, here at PERI we do a lot of research that informs community organizations' work. We get requests, there are technical questions, or somehow we get pulled in to a campaign to inform the debate. And so one question I'm always wondering is, what are the economic analyses that would be useful to your particular campaign or your particular group? Is there something that you wish you could say, hey, go do this? A question I want to answer that hasn't been answered or needs to be answered today, next year, something like that. What are gaps, information gaps that you think would be helpful for academics to produce?
Anybody want to start?
I can see. Oh, Jerry has one.
So I'm probably really the minority here, but I think it's been a wonderful experience for me, just being here, learning about this whole experience in the U.S. and the coalition of Immokalee workers, but also so many other farm workers unions. So I'm really thankful that I got this opportunity to learn. But if this was happening in India, one of the things that we would definitely suggest to the academic community is really also about, which I'm sure PERI is already doing, is to encourage a body of work around some of the issues that have been raised. So encouraging masters, PhDs, of course, but also, student internships. Like, for example, we would be really happy if, somebody from PERI would be interested in coming to India and looking at a very different context, in a way, because the entire informalization of labor is very different. The nature is very different from what I've been hearing in the US. So I think those comparative studies and analysis in itself would produce interesting work, is one of the things that immediately came to my mind. But yeah.
I have something in the nature of a research gap for EPI, PERI, those of you, and it is maybe really documenting the positive impact for businesses that engage in these worker-driven social responsibility. And maybe that some of this exists already, but for the companies that choose to join the Bangladesh Accord or the Fair Food Program, like. I think a lot of people have mentioned this over the couple of days, but obviously you all who are campaigning, you need to convince people it's good, like, don't worry, it's not going to hurt you, but also even for the governments. And this is something, the conversation we have with Honduras, with Bangladesh, but with a lot of countries, is that basically choosing the high road will be good for you. You will be able to attract foreign investment. You'll be prevented from reputational damage. You won't be dragged through the front page of the New York Times for your horrific labor conditions. But so just more on that front of demonstrating the positive impact, not for workers, but for businesses and for governments of these progressive projects.
And I would, first of all, thank you again. Of course, since you gave the credit to Patrick and for the genesis of the idea, but to both yourself as well, Bob, for lending all the efforts and all the staff that went, whose efforts went into making this such a success and one of the smoothest conferences I've ever been at. And coming out of it, I mean, we are still very much in the fight every day to make the ideas that have been brought forth at this conference of different ways of workers gaining power in their workplace, to make them known and to make them understood. I mean, particularly where we are, as Thea just said, the worker-driven social responsibility model, it's not something that trips off people's tongue, and there's certainly a lot of BS out there that can afford a tremendous amount of marketing to bury anything real and to cover up, as many exposés as Anna and her co-authors write. They have a deluge of money to market against that. So, publications are really valuable. We cite them, we put them out. People can use them in social media on their campaigns. Somehow, when we say it, it's not the same as when a serious academic institution says something. So don't underestimate your own, power in that way. And then I would say teaching about it, because, like Kate, we too are hiring. We're always hiring, But if younger people don't have these ideas brought forward by people they respect, they may not even think about launching a career with an organization that's dedicated to worker empowerment. So that would be my request.
Thanks. I just want to say, again, this has been a great conference. I learned a whole lot, and I think it's really helping me to evolve what my research lens is, because in a lot of ways, the work I do, the theories that I work with are, predicated on improving conditions for subaltern groups. But in a lot of ways, for me in my work, it's either been, quite theoretical or really just looking where the data sets allow us to go, right? And so kind of just searching under the light for your keys or whatever. But what this conference has really kind of illuminated for me is that there's so much that goes on beyond that light, beyond the light of where the data sets will let you go. And a lot of abuses take place that you guys are familiar with. But as a researcher, you don't really get to see so often if you're not working directly with people. And so that's kind of helping me kind of evolve what my perspective is and who are the most vulnerable folks and who are the folks in the most precarious positions. And if we can kind of tailor our policy to touch those folks where we can, I think we can do a lot better. But yeah, so thanks for putting on the conference. I appreciate it.
Yeah, just to follow up what Kyle said. Well, first of all, it's the first conference I've ever been to where one of the people who brought it together works in watermelons, or if you worked in watermelons, you work in watermelons. It never stops. And actually, saying that is it's insanely true. Because because of what you're saying. Most people in this room don't know what that's like. Nobody in this room knows what it's like. You know what it's like. It's incredibly hard work, right? It breaks your body. It breaks your body and leaves you broken after a certain amount of time. And that's what you give up for the money you get. And for that being the reality, that needs to always be right up front. And that was great that you helped put it up front by being who you are. So that was great. But Kyle had mentioned something earlier about the South, just in passing. In his presentation. We talked a little bit afterwards. And I think that's why I wanted to follow up on what you said, because I think what you said about the South and what you said just now make perfect sense. The South is a place where the light and the data sets don't come from, because there's nothing really it seems that there's nothing emerging from there in terms of organizing, and it kind of follows from your comment earlier. But there are things happening, and this conference helped cast light on that, right? And those things aren't necessarily like pathways to something else or whatever. They are things in and of themselves, and they're also not alternatives. They're just new forms of power that didn't exist before, and that can be really complementary to existing forms of power. So I think there needs to be more discussion of that, because there's clearly some thinking from the past that isn't exactly caught up with the present. And the future is going to be one where 98% of workers today who don't have it, they would choose, they're not choosing between WSR and union organizing. They're not sitting there like, I as a consumer, I'm going to choose this, not that. That's not what's happening. They would jump at any bridge out of the place. Just think about the video that we showed beforehand, that I showed before my thing, of Alejandrina in the fields when she was 14. Keep that in mind. Not just how watermelons breaks you, but keep Alejandrina's vision of what happened to her at 14 in the fields in mind. And that's what we're dealing with in the South and in 98% of the world where people work. So connecting those worlds a little bit more so we can think better about the future, I think getting people who are, from the union world together with WSR and having conversations would be really good, because I think there needs to be a lot more awareness on both sides of what's possible in the future. So.
We talked out.
Hi, Maggie Gray. So, yeah, as the academic, book, let's do an edited volume. But I think there are easier ways to do it also, to expand on wherever the videos will be, to have some supplemental materials there. But I was also wondering, there were so many amazing slides that I didn't get a chance to really look at well. I don't know if people would be open to just sharing the slides. And if maybe the organizers could ask about that, and then whoever was willing to share their slides, that could be shared among the community. I think we have the emails in the to-line, but to have a contact sheet, to be able to contact people would be really great. And then Jess and I were talking about the teaching and how important it is to bring people into the classroom. And, we can do that through Zoom now. Yet we're both at institutions that we don't have funding to do that. And so for academics, would you be willing to swap, visits to your classroom? Or if we could just figure out ways to get people to talk directly to our students, and people from organizations, maybe I would try in that case to see if there's any money that I could try to raise for that, but that's also another thought I had around this. Thank you.
Going back to your comment, Judge Laura, about how you're always hiring, I think as someone like Maggie, who, we have students that we are in the classroom with, what are, if you had a perfect vision of what you'd want someone coming out, the skills and knowledge beyond just awareness of WSR, what would that look like? So we're actually preparing people to be successful, because, I'm a researcher now, I used to be a social worker, but I'm a researcher now. And so, my connection to the working world, for lack of better words, looks very different. And so what should we be teaching the younger generations to make sure that we are building a workforce that is prepared to also work in these spaces? What's in Spanish? Besides Spanish? In fishing, it's Bahasa.
Yeah. Well, people have come to us from many different backgrounds, and I think some of the most important skills are, I hate to say this, it's going to sound so offensive. I want to say literacy really helps, but, people can't seem to write anymore. That's one problem. And so I'm sure you're running into it in your classrooms with your students. It's a problem. But beyond that, even more important, because we have people who are great investigators who don't write at all. So interviewing skills, the ability to establish rapport with very different audiences, because our folks need to be able to sit credibly in a conference room with the top representatives of Southern growers, who have attitudes, who are diametrically opposed to probably everything that they've signed up to work for and that inspires them. But they have to be able to have a game face and do their work and establish rapport, credibly get through the interview that they need to do, and at the same time be able to go into a field and speak with workers and make workers feel confident in speaking to them. So that's for interview skills. I said the literacy thing because we write extensive reports, and it's difficult to find people with those skills. And last but not least, I know we talked a lot about the 40-hour work week here and overtime and all that. But, when we first started, I used to say to people, this isn't a job, this is a movement job. You're becoming part of something much bigger than yourself. So Laura, my coworker there, she directs our complaint resolution process, and just like the people who have the shifts with the hotline have to be prepared to sacrifice for that week. They're not going to the movies at night that week. They're not having dates, or if they're having dates, they have to have a very understanding, person on the other end, because they may get interrupted at any time. And Laura has to be available all the time to oversee that process. So people who are willing, I'm not saying that people don't have some work-life balance. Certainly in our more mature, where I'd say middle adolescence now, we have a better balance in terms of being able to give people breaks and rests and vacations, and they get sick days and all that, and personal time, and Lord knows a ton of vacation time, and they're paid decently. But they have to be willing to go above and beyond. They do. So there's just no way of getting around that. So that's about it.
Add something to that. Thank you very much. I have found myself wishing that there were more crossover between political economy students and like qualitative research methods like ethnographic interviewing, which is something that translates very quickly to this kind of work. Any kind of sort of qual research, ethnography, participant observation, especially like the sort of left-leaning research as resistance kind of work that we've been talking about. So, I don't know. I wasn't a political economy student, so I don't know what the methods are. But going outside of the numbers and into some of the human skills, I think would really translate to this work very well. So anything that can happen in the academy toward that end would probably serve our organizations.
No sé si alguien puede traducirme. Bueno, pues creo que una de las cosas también que se puede enseñar a los estudiantes es traer la voz de los trabajadores a sus clases, que eso es una de las cosas que hemos hecho con los años.
Well, one of the things I think that you can bring to your students is the voice of the workers, which is something that we have been doing for years.
también en espacios como estos, ¿verdad? Porque hay muchos grupos que empiezan a crear tal vez como ideas de cómo apoyar a los trabajadores, cómo apoyar a la gente más vulnerable, pero si la mera gente vulnerable o la mera voz no está presente, no va a funcionar las ideas, tiene que ir conjunto con los que están sufriendo las situaciones.
Also, in spaces such as this, it's important to bring the voice of the workers because they're the ones that know the problems that they have and they know the solutions as well. So to include the workers in all types of spaces is really important.
Y también algo que como matemáticos pueden hacer es investigaciones a las corporaciones, ¿no? Porque también mucho de lo que hay detrás de las corporaciones quizás no se conoce, pero hacer estudios, realizar pues investigación ayuda a exponer a las corporaciones lo que está pasando. Entonces, eso es otra forma de también apoyar a los trabajadores.
And another way to support the workers is the mathematicians can do investigations into the companies and what's behind the numbers and find out what's going on really with the companies, and that's another way that you can support the workers.
Entonces, estar bien involucrados, ¿no? Con las campañas, estar involucrado con lo que los trabajadores están haciendo y elevar esas voces ayuda para que uno pues pueda lograr traer las corporaciones o lograr lo que uno está buscando como organización, como grupo.
And also to listen to the voices of the workers, to be involved in the campaigns and to investigate the companies so that we can know what's going on with the companies and use that information in our campaigns. ¿Es todo?
Anybody else? Okay. Going once, going twice. I guess we're done. So thank you a lot. Thank you everybody for being here and participating. It's been a great conference.